mama, baby, and for me, y'all. Merry Christmas, baby.
Friends, welcome to In the Movement. It is good to have all of you here. My name is Sam Heath, and I'm with Equal Justice USA, and the branch that I'm with is the Evangelical Network. So we're a national nonprofit that works at the intersection of criminal legal system things, racial equity, and public health. And so we talk about what does it look like to end the death penalty, promote restorative justice, increase community safety, and that's our hope. And so this webinar series is called In the Movement. And our goal is to engage and elevate the voices of people who are in the movement or in the justice movement. And so we talk with a lot of people here about a lot of things, all that relate to justice. And so we talk under the umbrella of things that relate to mass incarceration. And one of the really big cornerstones, or the big cornerstone of who we are and what we hold to, is that we talk about mass incarceration. It is a problem, but it's more a symptom of something. And the thing that we think underlies mass incarceration within this country is fear, which is poignant. I was talking with my kids last night about Gabriel coming to Mary, and often angels enter into people's lives by repeating the command in scripture that comes up more than any other command, which is do not fear, which is encouraging for Christians, but also really ironic as we think about our criminal legal system is built off of fear of other people doing these things and separating them. And what we want to see is that that's not how we can think about others. That's not a way that we can really love our neighbor. And so we want to talk with individuals doing that work, people who have been impacted by the system, and hear from them and hear their stories and how we can support and elevate their work. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're talking today mostly about the death penalty, but especially about exonerations and what those are and what that means and all that's layered in that. And we're talking with Herman Lindsey. And Herman, tell us just a bit about who you are and what you do, and let's dive into things.
My name is Herman Lindsey. I am Florida's 23rd death row exoneree. I am also Witness Innocent, executive director and chairman, vice chair of Floridians for the alternative to the death penalty.
Herman, I'm really thankful you're here. I've gotten to engage you lots of times and hear some of your story and see and be blessed by a lot of your work. And I am really interested for people to hear a lot of things. In a way, there's another friend of mine who I can think of who I'd say this about, that it feels like you've lived a lot of lifetimes and had all of these movements and things that have come to a really poignant moment now. So for everybody listening, the way that we do it is we'll talk for the next bit, Herman and I, and you get to hear and listen in on that conversation. We'll save some time for questions at the end. And so if any of you want to ask anything, feel free to put it in the chat or in the Q&A feature, and we'll make sure to come into that and address all of that at the end. And we'll also give you some ways to keep up with Herman and his work with Witness to Innocence. Any link that we mentioned today and a recording of this, both the audio and the video, we'll send out in an email as well. And you guys can access that and send that around. But especially I want you to know any link that we mention our website, we'll make sure to get that to you in that email. So a couple of things to keep in mind as we now turn to hear from Herman and his story, as we think, as I said, especially about death penalty and exonerations. When we talk mass incarceration, there might not be any other area of the criminal legal system where that's seen the most easy or the easiest than with the death penalty. There's about 2,300 people on death row right now. And Herman just shared that he's Florida's 23rd exoneree. And I believe Herman was the nation's 135th exoneree of coming this year, 195 total. So right now, 23 states plus DC have repealed the death penalty within this country. And we're now here towards the end of 2023. Executions have stopped for this year. They'll resume in January. But this year, there were 24 executions, which is down from the peak of the modern death penalty, which was 98 executions in 1999. But there's a couple things that are unique about this year. One, there were 5 executing states this year: Oklahoma, Alabama, Missouri, Texas, and Florida. But the Death Penalty Information Center released its year-end report and highlighted a couple things that were huge. One is that more Americans this year believe that the death penalty is administered unfairly than fairly. So that balance tips tipped. And now we see more Americans recognizing how the death penalty is administered in unfair ways. And there are a lot of ways we can talk about defining that. And then the last thing that I'll share is, because this figure really shocked me, but maybe didn't surprise me, or jarred me, but didn't surprise me, is that people executed this year spent an average of 23 years within prison. So death row is something that individuals are on for a long time. So Herman, I want to turn to you and to your story. And part of what I put in the description of this webinar were just some of the highlights that in 2009, the Florida Supreme Court ruled unanimously to fully exonerate and release you, saying that you'd been wrongfully convicted, you've been on death row for a number of years. So if you can share with us, what's the story of how you got there and how something like that happened?
It's a common story that happens in a lot of criminal cases where individual, and this particular individual was actually the prime suspect of committing the crime. He gave testimony trying to get some time cut off his sentence and said that I confessed to him in a jail cell. Um, there was no evidence placing me at the scene. There was no evidence tying me into the crime. It was just his testimony that was the state that depended on.
I mean, you used the word at the beginning that this is, in a way, kind of a common thing, which is really hard to hear. I also know that there's the video series of It Could Happen to You. We might talk about that a little bit later, but it features two stories, one from Randall, one from Sabrina, talking about how it could happen to you, meaning this instance of being falsely accused. So how long was it that you were on death row in Florida?
The case happened in 94 and I was prosecuted 12 years later. It was considered a cold case. And I spent 3 years fighting the charge and being released. So 3 years, and my case came one of the first cases in history of the state of Florida, where all, as you said, all 7 judges ruled I shouldn't have never even been convicted. And that was at a point of my direct appeal. So my first appeal, I was didn't take long, and I was released.
Wow. Now, can you talk about, it was a cold case, so it wasn't something that was actively being looked at. Did this come out of nowhere? Had you heard rumblings that this is something they were investigating? Was this like a total shock to you when they came? What was that kind of at the beginnings of things?
Well, it's a total shock that they was actually trying to charge me with it. At the beginning, they came to me asking me questions about the case, but they was asking me because they felt that my godbrother was involved in it. There are no questions pertaining myself being involved in it. It was just questions surrounding, was he involved in it? Did I see anything unusual? So I no time that I was a suspect. In fact, in court, we had a hearing, and the original detective that was investigating the case said he wouldn't have never even arrested me. He didn't find no probable cause. But the new detective that took over the case was new to the Fort Lauderdale Police Department and new to the homicide division, just taking over the cold case, reached out and tried to make an arrest.
At what point in all this were you thinking for sure that this could end with death row, or was it just unbelievable the whole time? Kind of what was going through your mind, and when was that moment of realizing like this is something that's happening?
Until I got convicted, I didn't feel like, this was any threat to me. I didn't commit the crime, so I was like, there's no way they could find me guilty of it. But then when they found me guilty of it, my lawyer prepared me to say that most likely I was going to get the death sentence. But once I received the death sentence, I even, you know, then I felt I was going to get a new trial. I didn't think I was getting released, but I thought I'd get a new trial. I wasn't familiar with the process of appeal. So I during the whole time I was mixed feelings because how you have feelings that the same justice system that put you here is going to be the same justice to free you is not coming.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't engender trust or hope in it. And yet that was the only option that was there to you, was to engage the justice system to be able to overcome the injustice that they'd already done. Can give a little more insight of what that looked like with the appeal and what that process was like, and how that found its way eventually towards the Florida Supreme Court and the ruling they made in 2009.
Actually, like I said, my case was very interesting. Um, Actually, anytime here in Florida, when you found guilty and sentenced in a capital case, and you sentenced to death, your appeal automatically goes to the Florida Supreme Court. So you don't have to go to the appeal courts. You go straight to the Florida Supreme Court
Hmm.
for review, which gives you a higher standard. And um, I had the luxury of watching my oral arguments on TV while I was in my cell. And it was amazing how Justice Quinn, Justice Priente, and the rest of the justice actually was acting as if they was my attorneys because they was wondering how can you get a conviction from this evidence that you're presenting? Where's the evidence? There's no evidence here at all, except for someone that has an interest to lie because it seemed like he was the one involved in it because they actually had um, statements that from another guy named Eddie Carter that uh, Mark Sims actually said that he committed the crime and he killed the lady. So they had that back in 1994.
Hmm.
And you can't present those things in court, but the Florida Supreme Court will also be able to be able to see those type of things. So
Mm-hmm.
it was when I see my oral arguments, I felt like I was going to get a new trial, but I never thought it would take the guts up and say, okay, let's go ahead and free him.
Wow. Wow. So that was unexpected in that moment. Okay.
Right.
Wow. Well, one thing I'm hoping people can take away from part of this is knowing it is extremely hard for an exoneration to happen, the legal process. And there's a lot of critical things we could say about Florida, but that's encouraging. And I didn't know that about those appeals going directly to the Supreme Court. But it is often a long, multi-year road for things like that in other states and for other individuals with this exoneration process. And I shared earlier that number of 195 exonerations, which is a lot. It might sound like a lot, but if people consider the difficulty, the years, the money, the time that it takes to get to overturning a conviction, it is extremely difficult. And so if we think about that, and we start to realize that we unquestionably have innocent people on death row and unquestionably have executed at least some of those individuals, then it gets really daunting. Then that 195 figure, we realize that that's not enough, because that process to get there, though, is so, so grueling. Herman, I've heard you talk about in other spaces about how Witness to Innocence was really helpful to you once you got out and kind of moving back into society. What did that look like? And then I'd love to turn to talking about WTI and your work there, but at what point did your relationship with WTI start?
It started shortly after I was released. My journey started with FADP, and they co- collaborates together with Witness to Innocent, and then I was brought aboard of Witness to Innocent. But life for me and very until I took this actual job has been like serving a life sentence. It's like I try to rent a place for me and my family, or I try to go get a job. The background check comes up. I was arrested for murder. It's still on the record, and I was getting declined a lot of things, even health insurance. And WTI, they have a program for us exonerees that we go out and we speak our story and they give us an honorarium. That honorarium helps us with being able to pay bills on a monthly basis. Then they also have what is called the emergency funds, where we can get, if we're in an emergency situation, where we can't pay the rent or the light bills are off or whatever, they actually would pay up to $1,500 for that. You get that once a year. So, with those programs there, I was able to survive. I was able to survive. And now that I'm executive director, I'm trying to raise the money to do even more programs.
There's the term of civic death that's out there, of what it means for someone to enter into society with a conviction on their record. And you're highlighting just some of the ways, right, that it affects someone, of them applying for a job, applying to rent a place, where it is that they're able to live, often voting, all of those things. And yours was an exoneration, and still all of this baggage remains, and it affects so many different areas of someone's life, and navigating it is huge. Well, that's a really unique and it sounds really poignant branch of WTI's work. So you talked about FADP, and just to make sure people hear again who that is, but it's Floridians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. And that's the state group within Florida that's working towards repeal. And most of the states, of the 27 remaining states that practice the death penalty, have a state org that works for repeal or for a moratorium. And I know you've been on the board there with FADP for a bit. So WTI, or Witness to Innocence, I'm going to kind of read what's online about some of their work, and then let's dig into what that looks like. But it says that they're an organization composed of and led by exonerated death row survivors and their family members, working to end the death penalty and change our justice system. And right now, you're the executive director of it. So before we talk about the work, though, what was that path of you going from receiving even funds and help and assistance from WTI to now being executive director? What was in the middle of all of that, those years?
A lot of dedication, a lot of work with WTI, a lot of building myself to accept leadership, accept the accountability and leadership while I was on the board, and staying focused and having a passion to do what needs to be done for exonerees, because there's no state has any programs or any kind of assistance for exonerees. And they may have it for a person that's coming out of prison, convicted of a felon, but they don't have it for exonerees. So our system wasn't designed for exonerees, and they haven't did anything to help out with exonerees. So it's very important that us at WTI maintain this family environment and network that exonerees can depend on.
Mm. When was the point when you thought about wanting to move from receiving help from Witness to Innocence to starting to work with them and engage them and further their work? I know you talked about speaking and the honorariums there, but when was that next step? Because you were on the board for a bit before becoming the ED, is that right?
Right. Our board consists of 1/3 of us. 1/3 of our board consists of death row exonerees. I was selected to be on the board, and I served things like 6 years on the board before I became executive director. And that gave me the insight of the organization and the goals of the organizations, and I have that passion for that.
So what does it look like as executive director? I mean, I know there's working towards ending the death penalty, but there's other things that you all do within or and around the criminal legal system. Kind of what does your day-to-day work look like? I know fundraising, you talked about before, helping raise the funds to support this work.
Actually, my day to day is very comfortable for me, considering I'm in a role of leadership that I have a lot to learn. Our staff, Carol, Jenny, Tricia, Deborah, they are outstanding to help me keep things together. So it's like I maybe have the title of executive director, but we move as one group, one group, and we deal with type of things on and on and on. And some of the things is fundraising. And like right now, I'm here in Tampa, Florida. I am being the keynote speaker for the Florida Public Defenders Association to talk about how to deal with your client, you know, and we can use exonerees in many different spaces when it comes to criminal justice issues, on the stories and the impact. I had the luxury of having a great communication with the attorney that I had representing me. However, it's a lot of um, problems involving clients and attorney privileges. So I'm here today to teach them how to deal with someone like me in that position. What would be a great way to communication. Then we also deal with prosecutors. We have forums with prosecutors. You know, so we do a lot of work in a lot of different spaces. And as the executive director, I try to be in everything I can to empower people to use the exonerees even more and more. And it's a tiresome job, but it works.
Well, I mean, I feel there's no end to the work, right? Of the possibilities. It's just a matter of what capacity you all have. Because often when I talk with people about the death penalty, they'll end the conversation by saying, Sam, this is the longest conversation I've ever had with anyone about the death penalty. And I think that's true of most people, that they're kind of taking the position of majority of culture or wherever it is that they are, rather than really thinking through it. And to confront them with a story or an exoneree especially requires someone to think about it in a way that's uncommon. And there are a lot of people that need that kind of experience.
That's what's bringing on the changes, because, like you said, a lot of people really don't know, and they really don't have the conversations around it. And that's what it takes a mental toll on us exonerees to constantly tell our story, and constantly relive it. But it's our passion to try to stop the death penalty so that nobody have to go through what we went through. And that's how the change comes, because people take interest after hearing the conversation and they get involved.
How many exonerees do you engage or kind of help bring stories to for people?
I think we have 40 of them registered with us. A lot have passed, but I deal with exonerees that wasn't affected by the death penalty too. So, on another note, I engage with exonerees a whole lot.
Most recently, I met Derek Jameson in Ohio when he was at an event, and we got to chat for just a little bit. But that was another example of him coming and sharing his story at a really poignant moment in Ohio, when Ohio could potentially, within the next year, be close to repeal, and him talking through and sharing his story. And he came before a crowd and he talked through how he got there and what that process was like. I mean, that's something that, again, in that room, you felt a shift in talking with people after. So many of people's reactions to hearing his story, and one like yours too, was that they didn't know, or they were appalled that something like this could happen within this. Sort of like you talking about those on the Florida Supreme Court, they sounded kind of dumbfounded, like, how could someone be convicted on this kind of evidence or lack of evidence? And that's often the case for a lot of these stories of how could, fill in the blank, this happen.
Yeah, and I never got compensated by the state of Florida for what happened to me, but I get my compensation from when I see people, especially new people, taking interest in it. And what's so amazing about this work is that we have so many youth that actually is taking this issue very serious, and ready for actions, and writing reports now about the mishaps on death penalty and why it shouldn't be there. So I think that yeah, that brings me very good joy and peace of mind to know that people really take what happened to me serious. And
Mm-hmm.
as you say, it could happen to them.
Mm-hmm.
One thing about it, when we're young and we ask what you want to be when you grow up, nobody say I want to be a death row exoneree or I want to be a death row inmate. And it just happens to I never thought I would be one, you know, and it just happened to people. And to let people be aware that this is happening can
Mm-hmm.
also help prevent them from being one of those people.
Yeah. One thing you said I really want to highlight and make sure people know is it is very rare for someone who's an exoneree to be compensated by the state that falsely accused and convicted them. I mean, there's often not even an apology. I mean, someone is exonerated, but yet there is often very little that comes after that before someone is sent back out into the world. You talked about some of the connection from when you were exonerated to now being ED, and I skipped over one part of your story I wanted to hear about more of. You went back to school after you got out, right? Can you talk about that and what you studied and the role that plays in what you do now?
Well, first I went back and got my bachelor for legal studies to learn about the law and how to present it and everything. Then I wanted to pursue my investigator license, so I took the course for investigator and mitigation specialist work because I wanted to be on that defense team to help find reasons that to help this person avoid receiving a death sentence. And one of the other things is that because of my experience in the streets and because of my experience incarcerated, um, I get a lot of people, a lot of more people that's willing to actually speak with me opposed to a attorney. You know,
Mm.
that some people don't have faith in the attorneys. So when I go to speak to people, I can get people to cooperate a little bit more when it seemed like difficult. So using that energy, I wanted to educate myself in every way to actually be able to work in the justice system to help make it better, make it fair, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I said earlier that you were the nation's 135th exoneree, and you shared that you were Florida's 23rd. The next closest state to Florida is Illinois with 21. Why so many in Florida? What is there something unique to Florida that this is such a high number? Or maybe the question is what is it that is unique to Florida? Because I feel like the answer is for sure yes. But why so many within Florida?
Well, why so many in Florida? Some people say that's a bad thing, but I look at that's a good thing.
Hmm.
And the reason I look at it as a good thing because I know a lot of these lawyers, I know a lot of these organizations, and it's attorneys and individuals actually taking this a little bit more serious and doing everything they can do to try to bring no innocent people out. Like I tip my hat to the Innocent Project, but it's also attorneys that's not a part of the Innocent Project that normal day, everyday attorneys that's fighting like crazy to prevent this. They're being affected by their clients being placed on death row. They're being affected by the client being executed and things like that. So I think that I must quote the good reason is because we have individuals down here fighting all the time, trying to get those innocent claims and them innocent people out of prison.
Mm, mm. And sort of referencing what we said earlier, it's unfortunate that it sounds like there's a lot of individuals that could apply to, meaning that are in that process of seeking an exoneration. Okay. Okay. Well, I also want to ask about faith involvement in groups. Do you engage specifically with faith communities in your work, or have you seen a response from faith communities? I wonder if, especially within Christian spheres, if people have reacted more or differently to these things than maybe in some other spaces.
Well, I collaborate with all faith. I collaborate with all faith. I've done work with the Catholic Church. I've done work with the Christian Church. You know, I grew up as a Christian in a Baptist church in Pompano Beach, Florida, Browns Temple. So I respect everybody's views, but the thing about it is that one thing we all can agree on, is that God created us and gave us our own opinion. And with those opinions, people have different interpretations. Even with those different interpretations, we must all come to a reasonable agreement, agree to disagree that life is precious.
Mm.
And by saying that, is that these people that's being executed, their life is still precious.
Mm-hmm.
We have to, to sum it up, I'm gonna say this. How can we ask God to forgive us if we can't forgive others?
Mm.
And I think that'll sum it up for the way I think we all could agree on.
Mm. It was last month in the movement that Lynette Grace, a woman in Ohio, shared some of her story, and she was a witness to and a victim of an attempted murder. And she had really similar reasoning, Herman, to what you said, in that several years went by before she felt in a place really ready to engage the person who had attacked and harmed her and had murdered her friend. And she said that exact thing of when she was confronted with forgiving him, because the person who attacked her asked for her forgiveness, she said, how could I expect that forgiveness from God for myself and not offer that to someone else? But it hinged on that moment, that forgiveness, which for her she speaks of as a release for so much for her.
Forgiveness brings more closure
Hmm.
than people think. And some people, I have not seen anyone get closure from someone being executed. I think closure comes from at the time the person is arrested for what they've done. And and I think closure comes at a time where a person forgive them for what they have done.
Mm-hmm. And those aren't moments often that we the public are privy to seeing. I mean, there often is a narrative of murder victim family members wanting quote unquote justice for the person who harmed them or harmed their relative, and that's justice defined as execution. And they pursue that. But what we often don't hear is on the other side of that. You speak with those families, and very few of them talk about that being a release or helpful or good or providing what it was that they wanted. And increasingly, there are families who are wanting an alternative and something else for the individual who harmed them. Now, Herman, you all had sent out an email, I think it was close to Giving Tuesday, meaning Witness to Innocence, and it had listed some things and was noting some really key points about the death penalty, of things people should think about. And one thing that it had said was that the death penalty was wrong because innocent people were sent to death row, which is true and we know, and your story and others are a testimony to that. What are other ways when you talk with others that you talk about the death penalty is wrong, other than just that innocent people are sent there?
Well, I'm gonna give a paraphrase that I use with a lot of legislators. Suppose you have a child and your child's pet pass away. You tell them that their child, the pet has gone off to a better place. You know, he's up there in heaven with the angels. So another scenario, something happened to your child, someone done something to your child, killed your child, and you press for the person to be executed. One day you sitting on the couch, you're watching TV, your child come back as an angel and asks you, Daddy, what happens to the man or woman that killed me? you tell them, well, I had them executed. And the child turns back and says, so you sent them off to a better place for killing me? And with that being said, it's like, how can we teach our kids that they're going off to a better place, and then we turn around and execute someone and say that, this is a punishment?
Mm-hmm.
You cannot, those two don't make sense. Don't make sense at all to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's rich, and it illustrates that point in a really unique way. I say something similar without the parable to others of trying to ask them to think about who is it that this execution is for, or who is it serving, and in what way? Is it serving society by deterring crime? Well, no, we know it doesn't. Is it serving justice in the sense that this was done fairly? No, we know the death penalty is done in an arbitrary and in a racist way. Is it done in a fiscally responsible way? Is it serving the community by using funds well? No, we know it's far more expensive to execute someone than to keep that person alive for the rest of their life. And who is it for? And often, if we go through those things of seeing the death penalty is arbitrary, it's expensive, it doesn't deter crime, we get to that point of who is it serving? Often people sometimes might admit, well, I just want someone punished. And that's when the conversation can get into some really deep places to ask someone, why is it you feel that's necessary? Who is it that punishment is serving? And ultimately, it's often that person who's calling for it. They feel it will serve them. But to the point of your story, ultimately, it's not at all. At all. It's not a path to healing.
It's used as a political game
Hmm.
and vengeance, and Lord said, let the vengeance be mine. And people need to let that be a true statement. Let God deal with it, And the thing about it is that I believe God is a very forgiving God. And when you turn around and you meet most of the guys on death row and incarcerated for a long time, you see, one of the things they do, they find God. They find God. Their hearts change. And, you could speak to some of them and you wouldn't even believe they was the person accused of that crime that they're being executed of,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but it's used for a political gain and for the victim families that wants to seek death as a punishment. And that's just a mind thing that they're actually speaking out of emotions. They're speaking out of hurt. They haven't thought about it. If you ask half of them, well, what is the process of the death penalty? You want the death penalty, you want to put to death. What is the process? They can't tell you the process,
Mm-hmm.
and so they're rooting for something. And most state attorneys don't make it easy for them because they get recognition for the most cases that they prosecuted and they received the death penalty. It seems like they great prosecutors, when in reality, that don't make them a good prosecutor,
Mm-hmm.
and they use those things. So I say it's a political reason for politicians, and for victim families, I think it's just something they think will soothe their anger, their emotions.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point, people change over time. I mean, in two senses. One, people change views over the death penalty over time, and that's incredible. But you're talking about people also on the inside. I mean, I think about Jimmy Barber, who was executed this past July in Alabama, and who admitted to his crime and what he had done, and worked to reconcile with his victim's granddaughter. And there was some incredible reconciliation that was there. But Jimmy became a Christian within prison, and spent his last few hours leading others around him and singing hymns. And there's some really compelling articles about him and his work. But he was executed or Will Spear within Texas, another individual who was very nearly executed, who is a Christian and leads a program there on death row called the God Pod, bringing people through months and months of education about who Christ is and how that fits in with things. I mean, I've seen it in court. Those are just two people I named because I've corresponded with them, and I've seen them change, and that heart change that has come. So another thing, Herman, that was in that email that Witness to Innocence sent out was it also talked about, and it said, because the voice of a death row exoneree is the most powerful tool for changing a person's mind. Can you talk a little bit about that and how stories like yours and the 40 or so others that you all bring to others across the country, how are those stories uniquely powerful, especially maybe when engaging maybe legislators?
Well, first of all, I'll be honest, is taking advantage of the fact that a person is fascinated because they never met anyone that was exonerated from death row, that had been
Mhm.
on death row. So, with that being said, you could take someone that knows the history of the death penalty and all the ins and outs, and you could put that person on stage and talk to a crowd, and some of the crowd would pay attention, and some may not. But if you put a death row exoneree up there and speak, you got at least 98, 99% of that audience attention. And it's just the concept of the fact that nobody ever really met someone that's been on death row, and they have the sympathy for the person that went through that, and they feel like that person went through an unbearable circumstance.
Mm.
So with those collaborated with the very effective words of the story and the message that's sent across, you're able to reach people, because it's like people are at their state where they're kind of vulnerable,
Mm.
because they symptomatic with you about what happened to you. So you're able to connect with them a little bit better, to reach them a little bit better, to actually be able to form their opinion to say, yes, I was wrong about the death penalty. And maybe I need to think about this with the death penalty, because I could have been supporting something that this young man could have lost his life. So
Mhm.
that's how that actually plays a part of that.
Mm. And there's a spectrum of how people are thinking about or questioning the death penalty. I mean, someone who's completely for repeal and thinks it's wrong all the time might do some of the same actions as somebody who supports the death penalty, but says, but the way that we're doing it is unacceptable because we are executing innocent people, or any of those things that we've talked about earlier. But it sounds like the stories are some of those key crossroads moments for people to hear. I know, especially even with pro-death penalty legislators, hearing an exoneree's story is a really key moment, because to your point, they've likely not met somebody there. And we know this was another point from the email you all sent out, which obviously was so good. I keep referencing it, but you all said, because death row survivors and the issue of innocence have been pivotal in every state that has abolished the death penalty in the past 20 years. Like, these stories are changing how people think about and reflect on the death penalty.
Yeah, I mean, a prime example is Oklahoma. I was just in Oklahoma when we had the bill come up, about maybe 4 months ago, and now they're moving a little bit better, because the speaker of the house up there really didn't want entertainment. But after the conversations and after the speakings, uh, he was talking to me on the side, and his main concern was that, you know, yeah, some of those guys actually find God in there. And he was
Mm-hmm.
speaking from a Christian perspective that say, you know, yeah, a lot of them guys in there, they receive God in there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he was like, he beginning to bring the redemption in place
Yeah.
and take away the death penalty and bring the redemption, look at the redemption part of it. So it does make a big difference.
Yeah, huge. And Oklahoma is really exciting and interesting as it is potentially moving towards moratorium and looking at that bill for a moratorium. And several of the legislators supporting it are very pro death penalty Republican
Yes.
legislators, but they will say, but the way that we're doing it has to end and has to stop. I want to pause a second and remind people listening that if you have questions, you can put those in the chat or in the Q&A feature, and we'll start to look at those in just a second, and then we'll turn to a couple resources that are on Witness to Innocence's website. But one question that came up early on, Herman, was what repercussions, if any, happen to the detectives or officers of the court as a result of your wrongful conviction?
Actually, nothing. In most cases, nothing happens to the detectives. Nothing happens to the state attorneys. It's just the individuals such as myself, the one that have to suffer.
Hmm.
And the suffering doesn't stop when we are released from death row. The suffering still continues in our everyday life, the trauma and everything. But though for those that individuals that took part of it, um, most of them is immune.
Mm.
So
Mm-hmm.
they have the ability to say we can wreck somebody's life and wrongfully convict someone and just throw them back in the streets. Oh well, nothing happened.
Which is wild considering, other jobs, if you're ineffective at that job or if you do your job in an egregiously horrible way, you're you're called to account for it. And yet you're right, there is a lot of legal protection for individuals in these instances, even in cases when they completely miss it, completely. Herman, another question that came through was someone asking about, do you find that sometimes fellow exonerees are afraid of or fearful about speaking and sharing their story with others or groups? Kind of what emotionally, like what's that journey like of someone being in a place where they're ready to share their story?
I mean, I don't think that any of them is really afraid to uh, share their stories, but there are some concerns. You don't want to be on a forum and you getting attacked by someone about it because you have people out there that says, uh, you still committed the crime. They just couldn't prove it, and things like that, thinking negative, and that can cause some very traumatic feelings, reactions, and things like that. So we make sure we scan any interviews or like we have a lot of news reporters want to speak. We make sure we take time out to scan and evaluate and research those that want to do a report on the exoneree before we send them out there, so that we make sure we don't have that exoneree in an uncomfortable space.
Okay. Okay. It sounds like it needs to be really intentional and careful. I mean, especially referencing what you said earlier of this is a difficult and at minimum and at most a re-traumatizing experience to share these stories of what's happened. Now, I mentioned this earlier and would love for you to speak about it. It Could Happen to You kind of mini documentaries. There's two of them on WTI site. What are those, Herman? And tell people about those. I put the link in the chat. I'll put a link in the email to those who registered, but talk about what those are.
You say the documentaries on our website?
The It Could Happen to You. So Randall and Sabrina's
Oh,
stories that you guys helped film.
right.
I'm
So
calling it
we
documentary. That's probably not the best term for it.
no a lot of times we do little clips to talk about take sections of a person speaking and put it together and create a message. Our staff team are very good at coming up with ideas and thinking about putting those together. Um, like we actually did mini series of each exoneree speaking out, stuff like that. And I used to actually bring them up when I had the Cruel Justice show. So that those individual films are basically to get people to look at and understand the message that, you know, this is not something that is planned in life.
Mm.
This is not something that you know, you could be walking to the store and then all of a sudden something happened, and you know, you're the next person on death row, and when you're the next person we're fighting to get you out. You know, this can happen to anyone. It doesn't matter about your background. It doesn't matter about who you know. You know, this can happen to you.
There's another section on WTI's site, Herman, of the moving portraits project. And this one was a little more recent, right? Of getting those portraits of some of the exonerees and having some really quick snippets, like 60 seconds or so of their stories. And I also want people to see it. Derek Jameson, who I referenced, his is on there. But we also can't forget that there are women. I think Sabrina's is on there as well. Yeah. I mean, we cannot forget that there are women on death row. I know that I think it's Alabama's death row has 5 women, and it's the second or third largest within the country. I don't know the first. So I work deeper with Alabama and know that one. But we're not just talking men. There's women here too. But some of those moving portraits, that project captures some of those too.
You know, that's the help of our great friend Martin Scholler. Forgive me if I pronounce his name wrong, but he contacted us and wanted to do some art
Hmm.
with us, some photos, and you know, ever since then, and this was maybe 5, 6 years ago, and ever since then, he's been a part of WTI. He's considered like our family. He's have an office in New York, and you know, he does this creative things with exonerees to actually put them out there so that people can capture the feeling in their looks. And
Mm.
it's very, I mean, it's very soothing of how he actually deal with us and bring that feeling out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Herman, as we start to move towards closing things out, what are some ways people can keep up with you and the work at Witness to Innocence? I'll put the website there in the chat and in the email, but what if it's more than that, what would you point people to, or how can they keep up with what you're doing?
Well, the best thing is to, you know, witness innocent or, you know, go on the website. And we're starting back to do our newsletter. So if you want to sign up to your newsletter, but me personally, I have an open door policy. So if you email me or anything like that, I'll try my best. I'm usually good at getting right back to people. But you know, you can email me, things like that. But we're beginning to put together a newsletter to talk about the activities of Witness and Innocent each week, each month, um, and little quotes and stuff from death row exonerees, whatever they want to express in the newsletter and things like that. So it'll be good if they go and sign up for the newsletter, you know, and if think we're trying to put it together on our website that we can uh, keep track of the events and notify
Mm.
people of the events in their area.
Okay,
So
great,
if that
great.
if they're signed up, we can notify them that okay, we're having, like for instance, I'm in Tampa, or Herman Lindsey is in Tampa this week. You know, things like that. So we're trying to improve our website to let people know where speaking engagements are happening.
Okay, wonderful. All right. I'm thinking about some of the language we use sometimes in the webinar is wanting people to go from awareness to action. And it sounds like this email list is both. You'll hear about
Right.
things to be aware of. You'll hear of ways to act and take action and advocate. Now I'm going to point people to 2 other things I'm thinking about as well. I've referenced both of them in this time. One is the Death Penalty Information Center, or DPIC. a week and a half or a couple weeks ago released their year-end report for looking at the death penalty in 2023, and it catalogs what's happened this year. A lot of the statistics that were specific to 2023 are coming from that I'm getting from that report. It has quotes, it has graphics, it has stories from exonerees, from all sorts of individuals have come together to produce this snapshot of the death penalty in this year. And that is a great place to go for awareness. And then something specific to action, I'll put it in the chat and then the email too. This will take you to a Google Doc that lists all I mentioned earlier, all those states that are still practicing the death penalty have state groups. So like for Florida, where Herman, you are, there's FADP or Floridians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. So people can get in touch with you and Maria and the folks that are there doing incredibly important and weighty work as all that is happening in Florida is happening. But that document lists your state. You can find your state, see the website to contact that org, get on their email list for that state, hear what's happening. It lists some national organizations there as well. Then I want to point people to the next In the Movement webinar, and it's going to be January 17th, and I'll put the link in there for people to register because Herman, it connects to our conversation. So in January, I'm going to talk with Katie Owens Murphy, and she's a professor there who's also affiliated with Project Hope to Abolish the Death Penalty, which is the nation's only state death penalty group that's led by individuals on death row. And Katie and I are going to talk about what's happening within Alabama, the active executions that are happening there. Later in January, Alabama likely will be the first state to execute by nitrogen hypoxia, which is a new execution method that is untested. And so a lot's happening within Alabama as well, and we will talk about those things. So I want to point people to that if you want to hear more about the death penalty and dive deep into a state for Alabama that sentences more people per capita to the death penalty than anybody else within the country. They're unfortunately really unique things often about each death penalty state. So Herman, there's a lot that's going on. I really want to encourage people, like you said, to go to witnesstoinnocence.org and sign up for that email list and to keep up with this work that you all are doing. Herman, thank you for sharing of your story, of your work. I know it is difficult to share that, and I know that what you are doing is unquestionably changing people and is a link in the chain as we move further and further down this road. So thank you for what you do, and thank you for coming and sharing it here with us.
And for some, I'm putting my email into the chat right now.
Great.
So if anybody need to email me personally.
Okay. Well, Herman, again, thank you, friend, for coming and bringing all of this to us. And thanks to everybody who came and listened. We'll send out a recording of this and all of the links soon. And blessings on you all. Merry Christmas and happy holidays, and hope that everybody, if they're traveling, are safe over these next coming weeks. Thank you all, and bye-bye.